Thank you. Well, thank you very much, and welcome to Broadway Buzz. I'm Joe Gary, and I am delighted to welcome you to Phantom of the Opera. We're going to be taking up a collection tonight. The producers are so poor, they may not get out of town. Keep in mind, this show is the most successful entertainment ever. It has made $6.5 billion. It is, wow, think of that. It has played to, perhaps we should put Andrew Lloyd Webber in charge of our government, perhaps, he has generated 140 million people have seen the show. It is literally played around the world, and they have counted over 65,000 performances of the show, and that's only an estimate. It keeps growing, of course, every night as it's produced literally everywhere in the world. You're having the pleasure of seeing a new version of Phantom of the Opera. All of the music is the same, the script is the same, the costumes are the same, but they have used a new director, a new choreographer, and a new scenic designer. Keep in mind, this show opened 30 years ago, and a lot of things have happened in technology in the last 30 years, especially in the musical theater. And so the end result is you're seeing a very slick, very spectacular, very memorable version of Phantom. Keep in mind, there are 9 original versions of the show playing in New York and London. It's in its 30th year in London. But in major cities, there are 9 major cities offering the show on an extended run, meaning years and years and years of having been in the city. And this is the only version of the new version of the show that is playing right now in Cleveland, Ohio. So you're in for a very special treat when you see the show. I'm not giving anything away in terms of a chandelier falling. I mean, this doesn't come as a surprise, I hope. But in any case, the chandelier is spectacular, and you're in for a treat way beyond the chandelier. Musically, it's wonderfully done. Keep in mind, the producer, Cameron McIntosh, has always been very, very smart. He's not only been able to spot mega hits and create mega hits, but he's able to sustain them over so many years. Keep in mind all of the milestones that Phantom of the Opera has achieved, becoming the longest running musical in London, becoming the longest running musical in New York, celebrating its 10th anniversary, its 25th anniversary, its film version, etc. It's extraordinary. And now we're into the new and revised touring version of this spectacular show. Okay, what I'd like to do is to begin with the Paris Opera House. Keep in mind, the Paris Opera House is really a major character in this show. It creates all of the atmosphere, all of the ambiance, all of the mystery, all of the magic, all of the splendor comes literally from the Paris Opera House. So let me go back and give you a very brief history of the Paris Opera House, because it so strongly impacts what you see in this show. Okay, so the time is 1858. Napoleon III wants to create one of the greatest architectural monuments in the world, and he decides that he will build the greatest opera house in the world. Over 700 architects submitted drawings and visions of the show. He picked a young artist named Charles Garnier, and his version of the Paris Opera House meant that it would sit on 3 acres of land. The conception was that there would be a traffic circle around the Paris Opera House, and there would be 7 major boulevards all intersecting at the Paris Opera House. So it is called La Place de l'Opéra. It still remains one of the great tourist sites of the world when you go and stand there and feel this tremendous energy of traffic coming everywhere and looking at the splendor of this magnificent building. And of course, it's set apart so that the vistas from all directions really adorize the brilliance of the design concept. So Napoleon III then worked very hard to create one of the greatest monuments of the world. It was not only going to be a place to see the greatest opera in the world, it was the ultimate place in Paris to be seen. So keep in mind, there were grand staircases, there were spectacular entrances into the opera house. On every level, there were tremendous vistas, etc. But let me tell you about some of the darkness of the opera house and how this will very strongly impact the story that you see. As they were building this, the first thing that happened, they needed to go very deep because ultimately it's really 17 stories. And they had to go very deep because they were going to have very heavy scenery that would have to be moved by hydraulic lifts. So they had to have a sort of sub basement. As they were digging into the earth in this perfect and pristine location, they discovered that there was an underground lake under this property. So it took them 8 months to dredge the water out so that they could put in a proper foundation, so they could have hydraulics there and lifts so that they could lift the 11-ton scenery up. You know, the scenery was 50 foot high, and then they had to be able to fly it out into the rigging above. So as they were working on this, the water started seeping back in, and that underground lake still exists under the Paris Opera to this very day. And every 10 years, the city of Paris has to find a way of dredging that water so it doesn't keep coming up and coming up. So the end result is that it's a very interesting and very eerie idea that under this magnificent monument, there literally is an enclosed lake. And of course, that will play very significantly into the story of Phantom of the Opera. Of course, the Phantom takes Christine off in the boat as he takes her to his lair underground, and so that lake is a very strong part. This is not a fantasy. It was not just part of the novel. It really exists. The other thing that's very interesting, as they were building this, so they started in 1858. In 1870, the Franco-Prussian War happened. So everything fell into chaos. Napoleon III was, put out of commission. And the end result was that the city of Paris was surrounded by the Prussian army through an horrific winter. And at that point, the people had an uprising, and they created what was called the Paris Commune, which was a government of and by the people. And they took over the Paris Opera, which was unfinished, and they used it as a munitions storage area, but they also used it as a prison. And tremendous barbarism happened in that building. Keep in mind, there are over 8 miles of tunnels, hallways, passageways below the surface of the Paris Opera. So you can imagine how sinister and foreboding the prisons could be underground, and tremendous atrocities were created. So after the Commune ended, it lasted in 1870 in that period, when a government was properly restored, the Third Republic, they of course found mutilated bodies, they found bones, they found torture chambers under the Paris Opera. So even before it opened, there was this tremendous mystique about the Paris Opera and the darkness and the hauntings and the idea that perhaps there really was a phantom. And so in 1875, the Opera House would open to tremendous splendor. I mean, keep in mind, this is the period of La Belle Époque in Paris. This is the period of the great Impressionists in Paris. This is a period where high art is happening in the theater, in literature, in painting, in opera, in architecture. The whole city is redeveloped, redesigned, so it becomes literally the most magnificent city in the world. So the Paris Opera would be at the centerpiece of this, and everyone wealthy wanted to be there to see the opera and to be seen. So, it sort of represented all that was true about the Belle Époque period. It was beautiful, it was exciting, it was cutting edge, it was art and civilization at its greatest level, but under all that there was darkness, atrocity, pain, et cetera, that existed certainly in France in that period. There was a tremendous amount of poverty in that period in France. And also then the Paris Opera would be the metaphor, really, of all of this. Okay, so that's the Paris Opera. And you will see a couple of other things for you. In real life, a chandelier did fall, and it killed a concierge, so I want redcoats to be very careful when they watch the show tonight. But it killed a concierge, so there were stories about how that could have happened, and everyone, of course, said it was because of the Phantom of the Opera. Okay, so there's this darkness, these ghost stories. There were suicides there, hangings there, people falling from the rigging. I mean, because the fly space was so high, it was a place where people would go to commit suicide. And so there was all this darkness with all this splendor and beauty going on at the same time. Okay, so enter Gaston Leroux. Gaston Leroux is the author of the novel Phantom of the Opera. But let me go back a little bit in his life, because again, it's enormously colorful and it contributes to the way he told this story in the novel form, which would then find its way into endless movies, television shows, stage plays, Grand Guignol, these sort of horror shows that were created. There's a whole tradition of performances of Phantom of the Opera in some form or other. And so it all starts with Gaston Leroux. Okay, he was born in 1868 in a very wealthy French family. His family insisted that he be educated as a lawyer. And so when he graduated from law school, his father unfortunately died that year. So he took this opportunity not to practice law, but to become a journalist. And early on, because of his training as a lawyer, he started to realize that the French government was very corrupt at the time, and they were taking people and putting them in jail without due process. And so he started investigating this, and he exposed the police, the judiciary system, literally the government, everyone, for a kind of corruption, for making opponents of whatever the political stand was at the day sort of disappear and be put in jail. And so he achieved an enormous amount of notoriety, and people loved his writing. He was then posted to the great hot spots of the world, Egypt, Morocco. Isn't it ironic? We have the same hot spots today. And he would write about what was going on in the world, and became the most celebrated journalist of his day. Right at the high point of all this. So this background all enters into the way he would tell the story of Phantom of the Opera. And his legal mind would very strongly impact what would happen. Okay, so right at the height of all of his success, he decided that he really wanted to write novels rather than be a journalist. And so he wrote a series of mysteries, and the most famous one was called The Mystery of the Yellow Room. And the premise was that people were locked together in a room, a murder is committed, and then you have to find the murderer, one of several people locked in the room together. It's been a classic way of telling murder mysteries, literally for 200 years. And he was the master of doing this. So he was very celebrated as a writer. He was very influenced by Edgar Allan Poe, and he was very influenced by, the English writers who were doing all of the mysteries in this period. So the end result was that he was really a superb writer. And in 1910, he would frequent the Paris Opera as any civilized Parisian would do. And in the process, he kept hearing all these stories about the hauntings, about the suicides, about the chandelier, about the underground lake. And he decided, it came to him that he had to write the Phantom of the Opera. And so literally, he locked himself away, and in about 6 months, he wrote this very powerful novel, The Phantom of the Opera. It was published in 1911, and ironically, because he was so enormously successful, it really did not generate the kind of success that was expected, that this novel would create. And it really wasn't until the silent movie was made with Lon Chaney in 1925. That movie was so wildly successful, there were ads saying, "Ladies, make sure you bring an escort. when you swoon, you want to have someone who will be able to get you home. So I hope, ladies, you have an escort tonight. So in any case, but it was Lon Chaney that was so brilliant, the man of 1,000 faces and disguises, who would immortalize that story of the Phantom of the Opera. And so keep in mind, this is right before Gaston Leroux died. It was put out, the movie was put out 2 years before his death. So he at least was able then to see a resurgence of interest in his novel. And his novel was republished then in languages all over the world because the movie had been so successful. As many of you know, there was a later version that Claude Rains did in the 1940s, and then there have been all kinds of takeoffs on that idea, right up to the very present. In fact, there's even a pinball machine that's named the Phantom of the Opera. Someone told me the other day there's also a slot machine. I didn't know that, but thank you for that information. Okay, so I mean, it's permeated our culture, and the Phantom becomes very important. Okay, so now enter Andrew Lloyd Webber and enter his treatment of Phantom of the Opera. And again, this is a very interesting story. Okay, here is Andrew Lloyd Webber. Let me just go back and do a very quick profile for you. Andrew Lloyd Webber grew up in South Kensington in London. Both his parents were deeply musical. His mother taught piano, and literally she supported the family by literally giving piano lessons from 8 in the morning till 10 at night. And she liked to focus on brilliant young artists who would conceivably have a commercial classical career. She sort of dismissed Andrew, her own son, by saying, well, you have some musical talent, but you're never going to be a great concert pianist, so I'm not going to waste my time with you. So she took orphans from distressed areas of the world and helped them, and literally had them move in her house so she could coach them to being a great artist. So Andrew was sort of put aside literally by his mother. And his father then had wanted to be a composer and had great promise. The Second World War came along, he suddenly had a family, and he could no longer afford to dedicate the time it took to become a composer. And after the Second World War, it was infinitely more difficult to find a career in that way. So his father ended up being a professor of music and always felt very disappointed in his life. And also, he was never very encouraging to Andrew Lloyd Webber. When Andrew Lloyd Webber told him that he was going to seek a career in the musical theater, he said, well, son, when you write a song as great as a Rodgers and Hammerstein song, like Some Enchanted Evening, I will certainly let you know. And Andrew Lloyd Webber, in his biography, said his father never let him know that he had equaled Rodgers and Hammerstein. So he did not have a very encouraging family to move forward. However, he did have this brilliant aunt, who was his mother's sister, who was an actress who worked in sort of regional theater, but occasionally she would appear on the West End with John Gielgud, an important artist. So she was a sort of flamboyant theatrical woman who took Andrew Lloyd Webber to all of the musicals that were playing in London in the period that he was growing up. And of course, this is the golden age of the American musical. So he grew up listening to and memorizing Rodgers and Hammerstein, Lerner and Lowe, and a whole body of great American writers. This was our greatest period in the musical theater, and so prolific. Andrew Lloyd Webber, as a boy, also had very strong interest in architecture, and this is very interesting to remember. He was very concerned with how something was built, and this included songs. I mean, when he took apart the Rodgers and Hammerstein songs, he was not just a kid listening to music. He literally took the song apart and said, how is this song built? What is the chemistry? How do they achieve this success? How do they create this crescendo? And so literally, he treated music like architecture. And you'll notice when you hear his songs, listen to how they build. They're so carefully constructed. And so that successive architecture and successive music so strongly interconnect with his world. When he was a child, he would create what were called toy theaters. This was an idea where you could literally build a little theater, a model of a theater, and then he would literally recreate all the sets that were used. So he was not only concerned with Rodgers and Hammerstein about how they created the music, he was concerned with how they told their story and how they visualized their story. And he literally recreated, actual reproductions of the Broadway shows. But then he decided, he used a family turntable from the old records and decided that it was so much more interesting to use a turntable. And so from a very early age, by the time he was 14, he was seeing theater in a new way. So therefore, he could conceive the idea of Cats. He could conceive the idea of Starlight Express, a show done on roller skates. He could conceive Woman in White, where he used media and projections in the most extraordinary and groundbreaking way, and kept using these sets that always evolve and always turn and never stop. So this came at a very early age to him. Okay, so by the time he goes to write Phantom of the Opera, this is his background. He has written Jesus Christ Superstar, he has written Evita, he has written, Starlight Express. He's had these enormous Cats, these enormous international successes. But the problem was he was not getting critical affirmation, especially in America. They kept putting him down. And so, he wanted to create the ultimate musical that even the critics could not take him to task for. So he was looking for a big romantic story. I mean, he remembered, of course, that Rodgers and Hammerstein always built their works on big romantic stories. And so he became enamored of the idea of Phantom of the Opera. And he worked with Cameron Mackintosh, who was the great producer. They had had tremendous success with all his early shows. And Jesus Christ Superstar, the whole range of work that he did in that early period. And so they viewed the Lon Chaney movie, they viewed the Claude Rains movie, and they were really sort of grotesque, dark films that really didn't emphasize the strong sense of romance. And at the same time, this is also very ironic, in 1984, there was a production happening in London at a little theater called Stratford East. And the show was directed and conceived by Ken Hill. Ken Hill was a very interesting offbeat writer who ran little regional theaters, but was always experimenting. In the 1970s, he had done a version of Phantom of the Opera with an original score. It was not very successful, and the project closed in a regional theater. But in 1984, he decided to tell the story using famous arias from famous composers and telling the story in that way. So it was a musical, but it was sort of campy, and it was sort of over the top. And it was a little, it was offbeat and not focusing on the romance, but focusing on the grotesquerie of this monster, the Phantom. Keep in mind, both the English and the French love a kind of theater called Le Grand Guignol. And Le Grand Guignol means that it's very grotesque, very bloody. I mean, just as we like Halloween 13 or whatever the Hatchet movies are that we see, that's part of the tradition of the Grand Guignol. And the English love it and the French love it, okay. And that's certainly inherent in the story. So Ken Hill was really more over the top in the way he's told the story. He asked Sarah Brightman to play the role in 1984. She was, of course, married to Andrew Lloyd Webber at the time. He had discovered her in the chorus of Cats, and then, of course, ultimately would write Phantom of the Opera for her. So isn't it interesting when you listen to Christine saying, I've come out of the chorus and now I have your music in my head. That's, of course, exactly what happened in the relation. I'm not comparing Andrew Lloyd Webber to the Phantom, please forgive me, but the storyline is certainly there. Okay, so they went to see Ken Hill's version of it in 1984. And they all thought it was very interesting, and they thought they might produce it in New York. And they would have Andrew Lloyd Webber continue to work on the project with Ken Hill. But something wasn't right for Andrew Lloyd Webber. He went to New York for the Tony Awards, and while he was there, he went into a bookstore on Broadway on the Upper West Side, and he found an English version of Phantom of the Opera. And he read it and was overwhelmed to see that it's really a love story, and a serious love story. And here he is wanting to write the big, great, romantic love story a la Rodgers and Hammerstein. And he finds the perfect source in Phantom of the Opera. So he goes back and says to Ken Hill, sorry, don't want to have anything more to do with you. I'm going to do my own version of it. I just want to pause and tell you, Ken Hill never received a penny in royalty. I mean, it was really his idea that started this. You can't copyright ideas, but I do want you to know, as the irony of fate would have it, after Phantom of the Opera had opened in London, and it was a great success, before they had time to move it to America, Ken Hill took his version of Phantom to America, and it made $70 million touring America. So, you know, he was smart enough to cash in on what was originally his idea, the idea taken away from him, and then he found a way of making his own money in the process. I like that little footnote to it. Okay, so in any case, Andrew Lloyd Webber then sets to writing his own musical version. He can't find the right lyricist. He goes through, the man who started to write the book with him wrote the lyrics, and he fired him. He kept him on as book writer, but fired him as lyricist. He then asked Alan J. Lerner to write the music. It would have been a very different musical, keep in mind. And Alan J. Lerner said, yes, I will do this. And then the day they were supposed to start working, Alan J. Lerner confessed that he was very ill with cancer, and he died a very short time after. So then they had to find a new lyricist, and the end result was what was created was absolute magic. I mean, those love songs are stirring and stunning, and goosebumps happen every time we hear these songs. So all the right things would happen with Phantom of the Opera. It would go on to be a brilliant success in London. It then transferred to New York, and it literally played, as you know, everywhere in the world. So it's had this phenomenal and well-deserved success. But still, Andrew Lloyd Webber is being taken on by the critics. The critics would say, well, it's plagiarized. That really, nobody talked about the Ken Hill story. That was a story, but no one did enough homework to find that. They said, well, it's really like Puccini. And then they referred to particular passages in Puccini. And I went back and looked up the Puccini opera they were talking about. And when Puccini presented his opera, they accused Puccini of plagiarism, I want you to know. So what happens, of course, in music is, you know, there are certain things, it's not that you copy melodies or copy motifs, but there are certain qualities, essences that happen. This happens in literature, it happens in painting, and so it happens here. Never has Andrew Lloyd Webber, I mean, he's been accused of plagiarism many times, taken to court many times, and nothing has ever stuck legally. So, you know, I mean, he is a genius, and he has given us an incredible body of work. As you know, he has a new musical right now, if you watch the Tony Awards School of Rock, so it's as far away from Phantom of the Opera as you can be. It's using 10-year-old children playing rock instruments and singing brilliantly, and people are loving that show as it plays in New York. So I think you're in for a remarkable experience. I mean, it is an epic, major work. It has melodic lines in it that stir us so deeply and emotionally, and it has tremendous power. So you are past the point of no return, and you are about to experience the music of the night. Thank you.